Hey folks, this is Haste, back with another Baldur's Gate 3 class tier list video. In this video we are going to be revisiting our big three arcane caster classes, that is, the Wizard, the Sorcerer, and the Warlock. A lot has changed for these classes in patch 9, that's why I feel like I need to revisit them. So if you have seen my previous tier list class videos that I've done individually on each of these classes, all of that is still valid. This video is just to update where these classes are now in patch 9 with level 5, and some of their tier rankings will change. So we're going to start with the Wizard, but first some general remarks on what each of these classes gains with level 5. Level 5 is big because full casters are going to be gaining level 3 spells, so we will talk about some of the level 3 spells that these classes gain. But it's also big because it adds a damage dice on your cantrips. So a cantrip that deals 1d10 damage, like Firebolt, is now dealing 2d10 damage. A cantrip that's dealing 1d8 damage, like Ray of Frost, is now dealing 2d8 damage. So you're doubling the damage of your cantrips, which is always good. But also in this patch, there is a bug, at least for me, where attack cantrips are now dealing max damage on crits. That means a crit with a level 5 caster on Firebolt is dealing a guaranteed 40 damage because it's rolling max on both 1d10s, and then of course you double it. So cantrips can really slap this patch. Honestly, I'm kind of loving it. And there's a fun thing you can do where you can guarantee a crit on like a Tasha's Hideous Laughter target that's wet with Create Water using Ray of Frost. I believe it does 64 damage. It's been a while since I've done it, but it is wild and super fun to do. Of course, it's a bug. It won't be in the game on full release, but enjoy it while we have it. Talking specifically about the Wizard now, Wizards have changed a lot this patch because of a bug that was available in previous patches, and this is the Learn spell bug. If you watch my other video on the Wizard, Wizards in the past could learn any spell from a scroll. It doesn't matter if it was in the actual Wizard spell list. So that means they could learn Bless, for example. They could learn Armor of Agathis, a spell usually exclusive to Warlocks. Wizards can learn it. That was really insane for Wizards because there was all sorts of weird interactions, particularly with Armor of Agathis with the Abjuration Wizard Arcane Ward feature. If you want all the details, go back and watch my old video. But the gist of it is now Wizards can't learn spells that aren't in their spell list. Alright, so they're now properly locked into just Wizard spells. That means you're not getting Armor of Agathis. And to me, that means that the Abjuration subclass of Wizard is no longer the best. I go Evocation Wizard now on all of my runs. I think it's just better, especially now with the addition of 3rd level spells, because we get Fireball, and that's kind of the spell that we wanted whenever you pick the Evocation Wizard. So yes, Fireball is in the game. I actually think Fireball is kind of overrated, to be frank. I go back and forth between giving it a B tier or an A tier. I have the rankings of all of the spells added in the game available to my patrons on Patreon, but I will be making a video on that in the future. But yeah, we've been arguing about it there on Patreon, and I kind of set it at B tier, but some members of the chat insist that it's an A tier, and I don't know where I'm going to land on that for now. But in general, I think spells like this that just do 1 instance of damage in an AoE burst tend to be overrated on their tactical use. It's fun to see the big numbers, but it's actually damage that's spread out a little too thin, and getting big numbers is best when you're getting big numbers on a single target, in my opinion. So, but I mean, that said, it's 8d6 fire damage in a 6 meter burst. Against trash mobs, it's absolutely insane, and damage is damage. It's always going to be at least decent. So Other spells that we can touch on here, I won't talk about all of them, but the one we need to talk about is Haste. And the reason we need to talk about it is that it completely defines the meta of patch 9. Haste is a single target ally buff that gives them this hasten condition, and the big thing that a hastened target gets is an extra action per round. Yeah, you heard that right, it's doubling your actions. The big use of this is combining it with any melee striker that gains the extra attack, which is every melee striker except for the rogue. A hasted target with extra attack is getting a guaranteed 4 attacks per round. 4. That's already crazy, but most of these will be going Great Weapon Master, which will get a 5th attack on rounds where you either crit or kill a target. And that's most rounds now, because when you're attacking 4 times, you're probably going to kill the guy. So realistically, it's more like 5 attacks per round, and that is overwhelming damage. On top of all of that damage, Haste is also giving them +2 to armor class, advantage on dexterity saving throws, and doubling their movement speed. So that's a durability boost and a target selection boost with the double movement speed. Hasted strikers completely run over everything in this game. It is absurd. So any class that gets Haste is already going to be really good. That said, there's some other spells we should talk about. One of them, Counterspell. Counterspell is a reaction spell that cancels a spell that an enemy casts within 18 meters of you, which is too wide of a radius in my opinion. And it's just an insane trade from an action economy perspective. You're trading your reaction for their action. Anyone who knows anything about the action economy of 5th edition knows that reactions should be significantly less valuable than actions. So making that trade, you'd make that trade all day. It's pretty much always worth casting Counterspell, unless there is an opportunity cost perspective, like you want to save that 3rd level spell slot to cast Haste later. It's the only reason not to cast it, because technically it's always worth the trade. But then there's all sorts of situations where enemies will cast spells that are just so annoying, and being able to just cancel them, no dice roll, guaranteed, just do it. I mean, it's so good. Counterspell S tier all the way. There's some really good control spells. In my opinion, the best 2 are Fear and Glyph of Warding, so let's talk about those. Fear is a 9-meter cone spell, so that's fun. I kind of like to see the cone AoE. It's not used as much. And what it does is all targets in that area of effect must make a wisdom saving throw, or 2 things will happen to them. 1, they will drop their weapons. It disarms them. And disarming is already really good in this game. There's some very important fights like the Nier fight, the Bernard fight, the Githyanki Patrol fight. These are difficult fights, and disarming them trivializes them. So already that's wild. But on top of the disarm, it also gives them the fearful condition. Fearful is like a modified frightened. It does everything frightened does, but on top of that, targets will run from the source of their fear. And this is a voluntary movement, which means it's proccing attacks of opportunity, effectively weaponizing the reaction on your melee strikers. So Fear, such a good spell. Its only drawback is that it requires concentration. And that might be why Glyph of Warding really takes the spot for best control spell in this patch. Glyph of Warding is a 4-meter radius AoE effect, which spawns a kind of trap in the game. And enemies in that area, or enemies who move into it or move through it, will trigger the trap. And the effect of the trap varies. It can do damage. I believe it's 5 die 8 damage of a kind of your selection. And of course, you're probably going to be selecting lightning or cold damage because of the opportunity to double it against wet targets. So it's kind of an AoE burst spell, and in my opinion, a better AoE burst spell than Fireball because it does cold damage. But you can also flex it into a control spell because one of its effects is to cause enemies in its area to fall asleep. Sleep is insane. Sleep cancels turns, which is already good. But when you attack a sleeping target, it's guaranteeing a crit. So there's an element of randomness in the sleep version of Glyph of Warding that I don't like. And part of the randomness is that I find it difficult to predict when the glyph is actually going to trigger. Some of you guys might have a different experience on that to me, but it feels bugged. It doesn't work every time I expect it to work. So there's that. But also, sleep, while amazing as a condition, it's easy for enemies to counter it when they can just use their bonus action to shove a sleeping ally. And the AI in this game will do that every opportunity they get. And because you can't predict which target is going to fall asleep, because it's a saving throw, dex saving throw, instead of the guaranteed that the spell sleep gives you, you can have a situation where the wrong target will pass their save and he will wake up his allies. So elements of randomness and Glyph of Warding, but still I think probably the best control spell in the game. Some of you might be wondering why not Hypnotic Pattern, and that's because I think the way Larian's implemented these spells, Hypnotic Pattern is just worse. Hypnotic Pattern is a save or suck, it's wisdom saving throw, it requires your concentration, and targets that fail for 2 turns become hypnotized. Hypnotized targets cannot do anything on their turn. They can't move, take reactions, they can't make an attack, and then also attacks against them have advantage. So it's like sleep, except a little more difficult to wake them up from it, but you're not getting the guaranteed crits, and for me that is a worse trade-off. I prefer Fear and Glyph of Warding over Hypnotic Pattern, but that said, all 3 of them are good spells. I give them all an A tier, to be honest, even though some of them are a little bit higher of an A tier than others. Now, is there anything else to talk about? Some of these spells are really good, but I'm going to save them for a future video when I talk about clerics, druids, and bards. That will be my last revisited video. And I will be releasing a video where I discuss every spell added in patch 9. So definitely wait for that if there's some spell on this list that you want to hear my opinions of. Altogether for the wizard, they're getting 3rd level spells, which is great. The cantrips are kind of effective now that the damage dice is doubled and they're getting max damage on crits. But wizards in patch 9 took a big hit because they can no longer learn any spell in the game. And to me, that is enough to downgrade them from S tier to A tier. Still a really good class, mostly because you can cast Haste with them, but not the best class in the game that they were in the past. So that is the wizard class. Now let's move on to the sorcerer. My tab is a sorcerer in this run.
What now?
Let's see what sorcerers are getting. They're getting all the things we talked about in general, that is improved cantrips, level 3 spells, and they're also gaining 1 sorcery point. So that's good, but not much to talk about here. If you want to know what sorcery points do, go back to my previous video on the sorcerer. I cover all of it there. Big thing to talk about is the interaction that sorcerers get with 3rd level spells and meta magic. There's all kinds of cool things you can do combining meta magic with 3rd level spells, and I haven't even explored all of the options, but a lot of people talk about quicken spell fireball to just clear a room in 1 turn, and that is really fun. It does a lot of damage. It's really good if you can hit a lot of people in that AoE, but I still think overrated because the cost in terms of sorcery points and 2 level 3 spell slots is just too much to justify it in my opinion. Still can be good in certain fights. The big thing to me is an interaction of Twin Spell with Haste. So I'm going to pick Haste now. So I can show you here. So Twin Spell allows you to apply the effect of a single target spell to a second target. So if I click it here, you can see one of the options is for Haste. Oh, it's not allowing me because I don't have enough sorcery points, so fair enough. We can sacrifice. Alright. Now I can do it. So you can see here, I got these 2 guys together. I wish it would allow you to select them, kind of like a system that Solasta uses, but I'm sure they'll have that on full release. Cast that, you can see I'm now concentrating and 2 targets are hasted. So I mean, what's to say here? It's doubling the value of Haste, and Haste is already the highest value spell, pound for pound, in the game. It's just too good. So, to me, the combination of Twin Spell with Haste catapults the Sorcerer into S tier. I mean, they were already an A tier class, but being able to double the effectiveness of Haste, it is overwhelming. Another note on Sorcerers, if you have watched my previous video on the Sorcerers, I mentioned that Draconic Sorcerers, their bonus spell, people were reporting to me that you were not able to upcast it. And I don't know if that was true in the past, but it is definitely not true in this patch. I am a white dragon disciple, and I have the Armor of Agathis spell. I don't have the spell slots for it, but I am able to upcast it. You can see if I select it, you can upcast it. So that is a big boost for the Draconic Sorcerer subclass. Both subclasses of Sorcerer, for me, are S tier, and in my opinion, the best classes in the game. You need your friends to do this normally, but if you can get 2 extra attack martial strikers, you know, say 1 barbarian, or hey, why not 2 barbarians, and you haste them, you can just run over everything, and the whole game comes down to making sure you never drop concentration on haste, which you can do very easily. So Sorcerers, S tier all the way, best class in the game. And that leaves us now with Warlocks. I got Will here. Level 5. Okay, Warlocks are actually gaining a class feature at level 5 on top of everything else. And everything else is a lot for them. We'll talk about the level 3 spells. There's some ones that they get that other classes don't get access to. But the improvement to Cantrips is especially good for Warlocks, because Warlocks gain Eldritch Blast as their, unique cantrip. Eldritch Blast scales better than all other cantrips because instead of adding a damage dice, it actually adds a ray, meaning you make a completely separate attack with it. If you hit both attacks, you're dealing the same amount of damage as other cantrips. But there's way less volatility in the damage curve, which is nice, and you can combine it with on-hit effects. Effects like Agonizing Blast. Agonizing Blast allows you to add your Charisma modifier to the damage of every ray from Eldritch Blast. So at level 5, you now have 2 rays, and so potentially you could add your Charisma modifier twice to your damage. It's similar to what melee strikers are able to do, adding their strength to each hit, but getting that on a cantrip, super good. Also, effects like Repelling Blast. Repelling Blast, each ray of your Eldritch Blast will push targets 4.5 meters away from you, and now you can proc that twice, and you can push people really far, and that makes the Warlock now not only a pretty reliable DPR striker, but also you get a lot of control just for free, pushing people with Repelling Blast, and you should absolutely combine this with Cloud of Daggers, pushing people into Cloud of Daggers. It is extremely, extremely strong. So that is the bonus from Cantrips. Now let's talk about Invocations. Warlocks gain an extra invocation, and they gain access to 2 new invocations. Let's talk about them, starting with Sign of Ill Omen. This allows you to cast the spell Bestow Curse. Now, I don't want to talk about Bestow Curse that much. The gist of it is that it is a pretty good spell. I think I rank it an A tier spell and has a variety of effects, including an effect that allows you to do more damage on hit, similar to an improved Hex. So that's really good for our Warlocks. But honestly, I do not recommend taking Sign of Ill Omen. It's best just, if you want to cast Bestow Curse, you can cast that with one of your clerics. The other invocation that they get is One with Shadows, and this one has some interesting applications. What it says is that you can, at will, vanish, going invisible until your next long rest. And that sounds really good. That sounds like you're getting the invisibility spell that you can use whenever you want. I mean, it takes an action, but every round you could potentially use it. Amazing, right? Amazing for dropping and controlling enemy aggro. But the thing is you cannot, One with Shadows in my tests, it stops working if you ever move. You have to remain completely stationary, which takes away all of the scouting and repositioning effect of going invisible. And then the fact that it takes an action means you cannot spam this to gain advantage on your attacks like you could with hiding. So, I don't know, maybe there is still some use that you can get out of this. I haven't tested it as much as I would like, but in general, I am tentatively unimpressed with it. If you find really good uses of One with Shadows, please let me know in the comments, but for now, I am saying probably not worth taking. And that means neither of these new options are really worth taking, in my opinion. The one that you should take is Devil Sight, and it's been in the game since the very first patch of early access, but this gives you the ability to see in darkness up to 24 meters, and especially on Will, that's important, because by the time you hit level 5, you're going to be spending a lot of time in the Underdark, and you're going to be attacking at range, and normal dark vision doesn't work at the maximum range of a spell like Eldritch Blast, but Devil Sight does. So to me, these are the 3 invocations you should pick on pretty much every run with Warlock. That's Agonizing Blast, Repelling Blast, and Devil Sight. If you want to mess with these others, some of them are good. I have reviewed all of them in my past Warlock video, but to me, the standout 3 are these 3. And now you can get all 3 of them once you hit level 5. So that is Invocations. Now let's talk about spells. They gain all of these spells that you're seeing here are available to the wizard, with the exception of one, Hunger of Hadar. Hunger of Hadar is actually a Warlock exclusive spell, so let's talk about it. This is a mix of damage and AoE control spell. What you do is you summon it, and it's like a 6-meter cloud, kind of like darkness. It looks a lot like darkness, to be honest. Moving through that cloud, it counts as difficult terrain, and it blinds targets. So it's kind of like a combination of Entangle with darkness, which is pretty good, to be honest. Except targets are blinded, and you can still target them while they're in the cloud. So yeah, a lot of positives in the control elements of the spell. On top of that, it deals damage. Creatures who start their turn in it take 2d6 cold damage. And yes, anytime we see cold, we should take note of it, because cold is one of the 2 damage types that gets doubled with the Create Water effect. So this could potentially be 4d6 damage. Creatures that end their turn in the cloud take 2d6 acid damage. Altogether, the damage is kind of worse than Cloud of Daggers, and so I still kind of prefer Cloud of Daggers, but the control element of the spell is really interesting. My big problem with it is that any ground effects or cloud effects that count as difficult terrain, I find that they get more in my way than in the way of my enemies, because, as I've said, the meta in this patch is just hasting a melee striker or 2 and letting them run over everything, and putting a big patch of difficult terrain just slows them down. It stops them from getting to targets. So for that reason, I tend to prefer Cloud of Daggers over Hunger of Hadar, but I still give Hunger of Hadar an A tier ranking. It's a good spell, by all means cast it if you want to. Another thing that Warlocks have gained in patch 9 is that the Great Old One subclass now has an actual level 1 class subclass feature. At level 1, they gain Mortal Reminder. With Mortal Reminder, when you land a critical hit against a creature, that creature and nearby enemies, I'm not sure what the radius is, to be honest, are frightened until the end of their next turn. Now, frightened is a pretty good condition. The big thing it gives you is frightened creatures have disadvantage on their attack rolls. So it's a kind of like a defensive control effect that you can kind of gain passively whenever you're attacking, which Warlocks attack often. That's kind of the main part of their kit. They attack with Eldritch Blast. So how do I rank the Great Old One subclass now? Well, we can directly compare Dark One's Blessing, that's the Fiend subclass feature, with Mortal Reminder. Both of them are adding a kind of defensive effect passively whenever you're making attacks. And Mortal Reminder, the defensive effect from it is stronger, but it's a little bit harder to predict because it procs on critical hits instead of killing blows. That said, I think I prefer Mortal Reminder over Dark One's Blessing, in particular because it is giving some defense to your actual front row units. And one of the problems with the Dark One's Blessing is that Warlocks in Baldur's Gate 3 play very far into the backline and often spend their bonus actions hiding to gain advantage on their attacks. It means they just don't get targeted that often, and it's pretty common with Will, when I'm playing him, for him to get a stack of Dark One's Blessing and just never use it, because he never takes damage. Whereas the effect of Mortal Reminder, it's a guaranteed disadvantage on enemy attacks, potentially turning a hit into a miss. So I prefer Mortal Reminder over Dark One's Blessing. The other thing that subclasses get for Warlocks is bonus spells. And the level 1 bonus spells that the Great Old One gets are definitely better, in my opinion, than the ones from that the Fiend Warlocks get. But for some reason, the Great Old One isn't getting bonus spells for second level spells that I can see, and that's kind of a problem. In the end, I guess I rank them both B tier. Still, it's the core Warlock class that's really valuable. Great Old One Fiend, it's not really modifying the play experience very much, so it's pretty cool now that we have a secondary option for the Warlock. That's fun, but not really a game-changing subclass overall. And that is the Warlock final rankings. I keep them in the A tier. I thought for a little while I might downgrade them to the B tier, but the improvement on Eldritch Blast is actually quite good, and you can kind of use your Warlock as a secondary striker. If you're unable to get a second extra attack striker, like for example, in this run where I'm playing a Sorcerer, the only companion that gets extra attack is Lae'zel, and now you can take Will as the Warlock, and while hasted, he's getting 4 bolts of Eldritch Blast, and that's a lot of very reliable damage, a lot of very reliable control, pushing people around the map. Eldritch Blast has always been good for attacking targets with a high AC, because you're attacking at ranged, which you can benefit from high ground, and hiding, using your bonus action to hide to get advantage on the attack. So I am keeping Warlocks at A tier for sure. I find that I'm taking Will much more often now in patch 9 than I was taking him in the past. In fact, I definitely bump up Will from where I ranked him in the past, which is the 5th best companion, to now at the least the 4th. I might even bump him up the 3rd. So Warlock's A tier. In summary, Sorcerers are now the best class in the game, S tier, because of your ability to twin spell Haste. It's insanely potent, but also maybe a little boring, so I could understand if you don't want to play that way. Still S tier for Sorcerers. Wizards are being downgraded from S tier to A tier because they've lost the ability to learn every spell in the game, but they are still one of the best classes in the game because of Haste and other control spells like Fear, Counterspell, Glyph of Warding. You want a wizard in pretty much every party. Warlocks I am keeping at A tier. Level 5 is definitely a big increase in power for them, but not so big of an increase in power that I feel like they get bumped up to S tier. They're still pretty much in the same position as being a very strong individual class, but one that doesn't tend to synergize with other classes. So one class has been upgraded, one class has been downgraded, and one class stays the same. It's a very satisfying ranking for this video. And all that leaves is now our support classes. That's Bard, Cleric, and Druid. I will be covering them next, and after that I will be reviewing every spell added in the game. And that's it for this one. I hope you guys liked it. I'll catch you next time.